Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. This is the #1 daily radio show for realtors looking for a no BS, authentic, real-time coaching experience. What's really working in today's market, how to generate more leads, make more money, and have more time for what you love in your life. And now your hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back. Today is part 3, and we're talking about real estate listings not selling, and we've been giving you what many of you are agreeing are excellent points on how to get your listing sold. And a lot of you are doing the smart thing and using this series of podcasts we've done. This is day 3 and the last day on this series as a checklist so that you don't make the mistakes that, frankly, a lot of your competitors are making in the marketplace right now. This is very important that everyone understands this. This is the best time that Julie and I have seen in easily 15 years to become a listing agent, provided you're willing to do the real work of real estate. And what do I mean by that? Well, guess what? It's not making a TikTok video about what you had for lunch today. It's not doing a TikTok video with your parrot. It's not worrying about making a bunch of YouTube videos, hoping and praying that somebody's going to eventually call you. It's the real work of real estate, which requires having real conversations with real sellers, and that's what we teach you to do in Premier Coaching. So if you're wondering what your next step should be in your coaching career, if you're wondering for, how do I get direction in this crazy market, this crazy economy, crazy political situations, interest rates, oh my, the simple answer is join Premier Coaching. Text the word Premier to 47372. Text the word Premier to 47372. Or just go to members.timandjulieharris.com. Members.timandjulieharris.com. And you can join Premier Coaching for free. That's right, nothing, zero, free. Hopefully you understand that you won't have to pay a thing. So just text the word Premier to 47372 or just go to members.timandjulieharris.com. Remember, in texting, message and data rates may apply. So Julie, you were on 6 high producing or top producing. Mm-hmm. I think you maybe had one agent that was little midland producer.
Up and coming.
Right. Up and coming. Right. We don't call them new agents. We call them up and coming. And from your perch talking with all these folks from all over the country, any big takeaways? And I know a lot of your personal coaching clients are actually also really, huge listing agents as well.
Yes. Well, I would say the big takeaway that I have, first of all, big shout out and kudos to them for being really drilled down with some extremely specific goals. We're not just, yes, we're doing goal setting for next year, but also for the rest of this year to have some really specific monthly goals. So when you have listings, are they selling or aren't they selling? I'll tell you one observation from a coaching standpoint is that unlike what we've seen over the past, even decade or so, where kind of the market moved the same, most people were getting multiple offers and escalating prices, blah, blah, blah. Now we're having to really look at each individual listing as its own thing. And that's kind of the point of this podcast series is if your listings didn't sell right away being in the first, weekend or two, what are you supposed to do about it? Because they don't all act the same. My listing agents that carry, 10, 15, 20 actives, they're still having some that get multiple offers, mostly in the more moderate price ranges, where maybe they got investors competing, whatever. And then others where it seems like we're having to make some changes. We're going to have to do something about the feedback. We're going to maybe do a price adjustment. But overall, I would say agents have to be a lot more aware, a lot more tuned in, communicating at a higher level, and at the same time, building listing inventory. Because as you said, this is the best time to be doing that. Work when other agents aren't working. Work when other agents have a lot of questions in their mind. Our coaching clients, they're doing that, and they're all on track or ahead of what their goals were, even with a shifting market.
It always comes down to doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it at the highest level.
But it's at that highest level that's changed a bit.
Yeah, absolutely, because now you have to have a lot of skill. That's what's truly necessary. Yeah. And you said something there. You said communicate. By communicate, we don't mean digitally. We mean actually picking up the phone and having face-to-face communication, because ultimately that's going to be more effective. Of course, that's going to be more effective. I'll prove it to you. How long have humans been on planet Earth? Let's just agree thousands of years. And how long in those thousands of years have humans been communicating face to face, not even having phones? Well, that would be a majority of those thousands of years. So we're a hardwired program to be able to communicate at the highest level, looking at someone, or at least having, voice-to-voice communications with them, right? So remember that. You are working against people's natural inclinations and natural programming when you try to do everything digitally. I'm not saying digitally isn't important. Of course it is. We use digital communication all the time. You want proof? We're doing it now. You're listening to us. And this podcast is obviously done digitally. But the moral of the story is when you're wanting to have high impact sales, remember, it's doing what you don't want to do and you don't want to do it at the highest level. It's going to require, and it will pay so much more when you're willing to have these conversations. And don't hide from the market. The market's not going to change. We're in this market adjustment, not just for housing, but for the economy. It's going to last years, guys, 2 to 3 years. Again, we are guessing as much as anybody is. We don't have a crystal ball, or our tea leaves aren't any more truthy than the next guy's tea leaves. But certainly, everyone will agree, this is something that none of us have ever experienced before, this economy, this housing market. So the reality of it is it's going to require, obviously, you to have a new skill set. And the best way to apply that skill set is having direct, real communication with folks and not hiding behind a keyboard. And when you do that, guess what's going to happen? Your mindset's going to change. You're going to feel differently about yourself. You're going to feel excited. You're going to feel proud even. You're going to look at yourself in the mirror, having just had a conversation with, say, a for sale by owner or a center of influence, a past client person, and having that conversation go really well. And you're going to be incredibly proud of yourself. And then what are you going to do? You're going to do it again and again
Lather,
and again.
rinse,
and again.
repeat.
Right, because you're starting to see the momentum build. But it's going to take doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it at the highest level. The good news is it's not that hard, especially now because a vast majority of your competitors in the marketplace don't listen to this podcast. I mean, there's listened to by tens of thousands of agents every day, but there's still 1.6 million agents in your marketplace. So most agents are going to try to make what worked maybe 6 to 12 months ago work now and work in the future. And it might marginally work, but it won't work anything like it did. Those of you buying buyer leads, you know what I'm talking about. Notice how your cost per lead has gone through the roof, but the quality of the lead has essentially become really, I don't want to even use the word worse, but worthless. How about that? I'm trying not to be overly critical, but we hear from these people all the time, and we have to somewhat, when we're presenting on the podcast, we don't speak as directly as we do if we are on a coaching call.
That's true.
But if we are on a coaching call, if I were talking with one of you, and you're a real advocate of buying buyer leads, I would ask you to do the math on how much that buyer lead was costing, factor in all your costs, and you quickly realize that you are working for basically, $8 or $9 an hour if that buyer bought anything at all, but you're paying in some cases $300, $400, $500 per buyer lead, not per closing. So the math of making bought buyer leads work really didn't work before, certainly doesn't work now. So open your mind to the new opportunities this market presents, and don't be scared. Don't procrastinate. That's the other thing. You do have an advantage right now. And you'll probably have this advantage for the next 6 to 12 months because the market's going to go through a real clearing. Agents who don't know how to actually compete in this new marketplace, they're not going to be around in a year. They're not going to be around in 18 months. That's unfortunately the truth. So a lot of agents that were doing a lot of the narcissistic type marketing that's been so prevalent in the last few years, I don't know how they're going to survive in this new market that requires skills and people having a real professional sales-minded approach to selling real estate. It's going to be interesting.
But that makes room for everyone else who is up and coming, who is experienced, because on the other end of the spectrum, you have some agents that have maybe been at it for a while that don't want to go through another shift, and they're just going to hang up their license and retire. All of this means that for those of you who are focused, who are skills-based, who are taking action, and who are being versatile, all of you guys are absolutely going to thrive. I already see it with our coaching clients. They are drilled down, man. You don't get any negativity from them. There's no like, gosh, what's going on out there? They're like, let me tell you about the listings I've got set up. And I ask them, because we're trying to get the new profile through the shift, what's going on? And for those of you who are listening where you've convinced yourselves that, because your showing activity maybe is slower and maybe you've lost some buyers due to interest rates, that nothing's going on, well, the first thing you should do is get into your MLS and see how much is pending, because there's pendings all around you. See how many new listings are out there. There's new listings every single day. The inventory is going up. And then ask yourself, how many of those deals are you in the middle of? Because that proves to you there's a lot going on, but the nature of it has changed.
Well, yeah, to your point, Julie, I mean, what was it? 2021, there were 6.1 million, I think it was 6.13 million home sales. This year, it's projected there's going to be something like 5.1 or 5.2 million home sales. Nobody knows for sure what next year is going to be, but I'll tell you this. at the very depth of the housing crash, there are 4.35, I believe, million home sales.
Yeah.
So even if it goes down to 4.35 million home sales, which it most certainly won't, but if it were to, remember, that's a home sale, and there's two sides to a real estate transaction. So that's what, almost at 8.7 million real estate commissions that will be paid. The average.
How many do you need?
Exactly. 8.7. Let's just call it 9 million. Forgive me for rounding up. And then the average home that's selling is going to be what, 425,000, 450,000 with added inflation. And then you multiply that times whatever your local commission is. Guys, hello. Are you telling me there's not a lot of opportunity out there? The opportunity is just going to different agents. That's really what's happening. Agents that are willing to do the real work of real estate, which is what we teach you in Premier Coaching. So, Julie, let's finish out day 3. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. And I know a lot of you guys are writing these down. We don't share our notes anymore on the podcast. Why? Because a lot of people are cutting and pasting our notes and reproducing them without our permission. So now we read you our notes. And so it's up to you to take notes from what Julie's about to share with you at point number 11.
All right, point number 11. This is part 3 of our 3-part series about not just taking listings, but making sure that they sell. So all of these points you can use when you take the listing prior to getting it active, but also for those of you who maybe have some listings that didn't sell immediately. Point number 11, does your listing have negative feedback that never gets remedied? Obviously, if it's already on the market, you're getting feedback. Now, let's hover there for a second.
What's feedback,
Some
Julie?
of these guys have never done feedback because they didn't need to. The feedback was, here's your offer.
Right. But on the listing side is what Julie's talking about. And there probably are better solutions to homefeedback.com now, because homefeedback.com is owned by ShowingTime, and ShowingTime is owned by Zillow. And so that Zillow.
But there's tons of apps for this.
Yeah, there's tons of apps. You might want to go and find out a different widget to do home feedback. But for those of you who don't know or have forgotten, again, by the way, you can do this, have a person do this. We teach our coaching clients when meeting with a seller to give the seller an option. Do they want live feedback or they want digital feedback? And you can use, again, homefeedback.com or one of the other widgets that does the same thing. And what it does is it'll email that co-op showing, the buyer's agent that showed the property, and ask for feedback from the seller. Feedback from their buyer. The other option is you just have somebody on staff. You could even have a VA, right? Somebody from the Philippines making the calls to the co-op buyer, asking for feedback, maybe 5 simple questions. And the third solution, and this is something that, frankly, it's the easiest to implement, doesn't cost you any money, is leave a simple card in the house for the buyer's agent to have the buyer fill out while they're in the property, giving immediate feedback to the seller. The disadvantage to that is some of their feedback might be a little bit, shall we say, raw, might be too truthy for the seller.
It could be, so be careful.
And the other problem is you're not going to get it because the seller's going to have it. You're not going to have it, so you're not going to be there to help translate the feedback to the seller, which, by the way, goes back to one of the things you get when you join our coaching program. I don't remember what level it's on, but it's I don't remember the name.
It's level 2 or 3, proven home selling system, and it's called, I think I'm reading your mind, the feedback translator.
Exactly.
So and I know feedback is news for some of you, and if you're a coaching client, you have samples of all of this in part of Premier, but really what we're talking about is when the feedback is, well, we're just going to keep on looking like the house, but it wasn't for us. What does that really mean? It probably means that they're going to go find something that's priced less that does meet their needs. Well, so you've got to, you have to be able to translate all of that.
The house smelled earthy. The home feedback. What does earthy mean?
My favorite one of all time was a California agent whose feedback constantly was smells and shows like a zoo.
On her listing.
On her listing. And, my heart goes out to her because it was her very first listing. And I had to convince her that not every listing was going to be like this. So finally, after getting that like 4 or 5 times, she investigated. And as it turns out, it was a divorce situation. And one of them was still living in the house with their support miniature pony living inside the house, and there was actual horse manure in the house. Thus, the showing feedback shows like and smells like a zoo. So back to our point here, does your listing have negative feedback that never gets remedied and the price hasn't improved to reflect that?
So when you take a listing, after you get the paperwork signed, you give the seller this book, basically. And again, it's called, for those
Proven Home Selling System.
For those of you in Premier Coaching, make sure you download that. You can personalize it, but really there's not much personalization that needs to be done. And in there is the feedback translator where they can go and essentially, translate all the feedback. So you're then delegating any potential bad news that you'd normally have to give to the seller to the book. You're asking them, showing them when you take the listing to flip through the pages, have them go there as their reference. Don't put it online. Give them something because it feels more substantiated appreciative. It makes it feel like you're giving them, because you are giving them something that has more value than just telling them to go to a website.
That's right. But the point is that if you keep on hearing the same things, don't do nothing about it. You've either got to adjust the price to reflect what you're hearing, or fix the negative, in many cases, help the seller fix the negative feedback. One of my coaching clients has an older home in an older area, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. We thought that it was priced correctly. She sent me a picture of it, and it's a metal door that used to be just a decent-looking front door, green front door, but it has a big swath of rust over the front, and it has terrible curb appeal. So that's something that's probably pretty easy to fix.
Point number 3, or point number 12, which is similar. Does your listing have too many personal items?
Like family pictures, degrees on the wall, specific artwork, good, bad, or otherwise. These things can distract the buyer from focusing on the property and how they would live there.
That's really important. And it's, again, one of those things that it's hard to tell a seller to remove their family pictures or remove their degrees and their diplomas. That's the reason when you take the listing, you give them the guide, and then you flip to the page of things they should be doing, a checklist of immediate items before their first showing, one of which, I think it's point number 3, is to remove all the tchotchkes. Remove the plates, the beer can collection. Remove, of course, this might not apply in all markets, but if they have any dead animal heads on the wall, maybe that's market specific, but that might not be a good thing.
Maybe not.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that is a thing in many markets. So Texas, I'm thinking about.
Well, actually, I was thinking of Austin. It's so funny with Austin becoming, it's already become like mini California, and all the Austonians, most of them being, real Texans, basically.
Hunters,
right. And when you go to the MLS in Austin, as soon as you go out maybe 5 miles from central Austin, you start getting into real Texas. Julie and I lived 30 miles north of Austin. We lived there, and we were in real Texas. It was unusual, let's say, not to walk into somebody's house and have just a whole barrage of wild animals staring back at you. Yeah, mounts, exactly.
Yes, which was, something to get used to. But imagine somebody coming from a different mindset, different market, walking in there. Maybe they're just going to be turned off by it.
They won't even want to see the pictures, really.
No,
a lot of cases.
But there's a script to that. How you live in a house when it's being marketed for sale is different than how you actually live in the house. And since you're moving anyway, why don't we go ahead and box some of this up?
Or bury the heads and have a nice funeral for them. But anyway, moving on.
Yeah. Okay, so point number 13, does your listing have obvious detriments like, this is again kind of similar, like bugs, dog hair, cat box smells, unidentifiable smells or stains, or other off-putting things that are making the buyer run away? Either price it to reflect that condition or fix the condition. Even a dirty, smelly, scary house will sell for the right price.
And again, we give them lists of things they can do and suggestions on way they can fix all these smells. There's actually smelling odors are one of the hardest things to figure out where they're coming from, but one of the easiest things to fix.
Yes.
There's on Amazon, and you maybe want to consider getting one of these guys as...
This is posted in Premiere, by the way.
Oh, is it really?
It is, because I kept on sending the link to so many coaching clients, I just decided to put it in there.
What was it called?
An ionizer.
Ionizer, yeah, and it's this little metal box, and it's ridiculous. It's so effective that it'll change the smell of basically an entire house.
Like smoky houses, cat pee houses, all of that kind of thing. And especially the worst, I think, is unidentifiable, fishy, what is that smell? But the air ionizer is something that you should have in your real estate listing agent toolkit. Put your name on it, put a sticker on it so you remember to get it back on your listing. Maybe, those of you who have lots of listings, maybe you should have 3 or 4 of those. And, run it it only takes like an hour or 2 before a showing to pretty much clear the air out.
But yes, exactly. Don't, you're not supposed to breathe the air coming out of the thing. Don't really understand why. Just remember that. So don't run it while they're in the house. Run it before they get to the listing.
And that also maybe is presenting an objection that they wouldn't have otherwise had.
Right.
So, what is this machine doing, right?
Exactly.
So that's just a little tip from the front lines. Okay, but don't have strange things going on. All right. It was okay when we were the only listing, but not now. All right, number 14, does your listing have a lower than expected buyer side commission? If a buyer's agent is setting up showings and they have other choices, your listing will be deprioritized if the commission is too low.
Now let's talk about that. A lot of people get really fussy when we make this point. A lot of people are going to say the buyer's agent ethically is obligated to show the property that's most appropriate for the buyer and all of that. And guess what? We 100% agree. But reality being what it is, people are often going to, if something is marketably less appealing from a buyer's agent perspective.
When they have choices.
When they have choices, right. When there's a choice, for example, let's say, just so we can stage this correctly, and no, do not give us a nasty comment. saying that we're telling buyers agents to show the listings that have higher commissions. Statistically, the listings that have higher commissions in a market like this sell faster. So all we're doing is suggest you actually dial into reality.
We're facting.
We're facting. That's right. And that's, for example, the reason that in some markets, we were talking in San Antonio the other day, the average buyer agent, what D.R. Horton was it?
It was either KB or D.R. Horton. I think
Yeah,
it might
their
be
their
KB.
buyer agent commission was in some cases on
Up
some
to 6%.
6% just on the buyer side. So imagine this is going to be your reality. Your buyer shows up. They're looking at 3 different homes, and all 3 of the homes are a good candidate, a good fit for whatever they are looking for. Enough bedrooms, bathrooms, location, everything's exactly the way they want it. One of them pays less than market rate commission, and the other pays, say for example, more, and the other substantially more. You're naturally going to want to lean towards the one that pays them substantially more if all things are the same. I don't think there are any buyer agents out there, hopefully none listening, that would somehow want to bend the, essentially bend the, what would you say, the deal towards what's best for the buyer's agent. That is in what's best for your commission. That is technically and absolutely unethical.
Well, it's an agency violation technically, if you
Right.
want to talk about that.
But you can even show, and this is what we coach agents to do on the buyer side, show the buyers what the commission is and have them clearly understand, just full disclosure so nobody's surprised. I don't want them finding out after you're in contract or them second guessing after they're in contract. Well, it looks like, Bob put me in contract on this house because it paid a 6% co-op. I didn't know that. Maybe I wouldn't have wanted this house had I known that Bob was getting twice the normal commission or whatever it was going to be.
Especially if there were equal choices.
Exactly. But the buyer's agent, if something doesn't go perfectly in the closing process or whatever, might forget that it was their decision and they made it. So just remember, over-disclosure is always a good measure to keep yourself out of hot water. And Julie, go ahead with the secret.
Okay, so the secret commissions are actually rising in a shifting market. Don't be the only one paying a terrible percentage to the buyer side agent. They may just opt to not show your listing at all, again, because there are other choices. And we can, beat agency to death on that philosophy, but it is what it is. Evident by the fact that agents are reticent to show for sale by owners. Why is that? Because they don't know what the commission deal is. So you go right to your MLS instead. So it's not something to really litigate on a podcast. It is just a fact. And different markets are more or less flexible. Just be careful that you're not the only one that gets booted to the bottom of the list because you're doing this.
And yes, we realize that this, again, is a thorny issue. We are not wanting to walk into the briar patch here. No. We're just pointing out the fact that obviously if you've got something for sale, make it as appealing as possible. And one of the things you can do, you don't have to do, but you should consider doing, is offering an incentive to the buyer's agent. And that will make your house, that listing, even that much more appealing. And if you're wondering why, Bob is selling all of his listings, within a couple of weeks and yours aren't selling or yours are taking a couple of months, go to see what chances are Bob's listening to this podcast. Mm-hmm. Chances are Bob's doing everything we suggested over the past 3 podcasts. Do the same thing. Copy what Bob's doing, right?
Yeah. Well, so for example, let's say that I'm a really motivated buyer and I've got one day this weekend to go out and I'm very qualified. I'm ready to make a decision. And I'm scanning through everything and my agent is scanning through everything. And there's 10 houses that really, I think, meet my criteria, my price range and all the rest. And Bob's listing not just says there's even a $500 bonus for the buyer's agent, but also that the seller is willing to contribute towards buyer's closing costs.
Buy down points, flexible on closing.
Might consider contingencies. I'm probably going to want to see that first. And that might be my decision before I even get to the other listings. I might not even want to see those if it really meets my criteria and I get all of those things.
Again, guys, it's just certain, it's obvious.
Competitive.
It's obvious market dynamics though, because you're going to, I know a lot of you, this is like totally mind boggling because you've not been in this situation because you've been selling in this crazy seller's market. But what's going to happen is you're going to have 3, 4, 5 houses sometimes that the buyer can really choose between any of them. Now, we do give you a lot of, I'm remembering the Flora model script. I'm remembering all these buyer agent scripts. This is all part of our
buyer mastery is what you're talking about.
Exactly. That's part of the Premier Coaching Program. But what's going to happen is the buyer is going to essentially find houses that are, if it's not this one, it's this one, it's this one, it's this one. And they're going to have a hard time making a decision which one they want to make an offer on. And that lack of, that hard time making a decision might result in them making no decision, which might result in you not getting an offer on your listing. So the suggestion we have is do whatever it takes to make your listing that much more competitive, because as nice as the seller and you maybe even think that listing is, there are others out there that are going to be just as nice. But if you're going to overtly in the description and maybe even on the kitchen counter include some tchotchkes in the house, the pool table's included, the hot tub's included. But how about this? The seller is willing to buy the buyer's rate down. Or how about the house has been pre-inspected and here is a stack of the receipts showing all the inspections that have been done. That's going to save the buyer the hassle of worrying about the inspection issue. You guys get it?
And sometimes it'll save the seller tens of thousands of dollars in your act of desperation just driving the price down every week, which they don't want to hear from you anyway. You may end up doing that after you've done some of these things, but often this will be enough to nudge that decision making. Remember, the best buyers right now, showings are becoming more precious. So make sure that you are the one they want to see. So point number 15, our last point in this 3-part pod series, are you being complacent? This is a big issue for agents right now. Are you being complacent? Are you the problem or ineffective at communicating with the seller?
Or afraid of communicating with the seller?
Many times because you haven't had to deal with this for a while. When there's competition in the market, you must have a proactive strategy for being the listing that wins. So work to eliminate these 15 potential challenges that we've talked about over the past 3 podcasts before you launch the listing, ideally. But if that's impossible, you must price the home to be more competitive. Ideally, after doing all of these things to make it more competitive, it's no longer good enough for a listing to just be available. That's what sold them before. It was the only thing for anybody to write on. The home you're listing must shine and be the clear choice for any buyer who sees it or buyer's agent seeing it in the MLS.
So let's talk about this communication thing. We give you scripts in Premier Coaching, what to say when you're supposed to be calling the sellers. We suggest you call the sellers. Not all of them are going to want to speak with you every week. Some of them are just going to be more than happy with getting the feedback from whatever feedback widget you're using. They might be happy with just a summary of the showing activity. But we give you scripts and exactly what you should be covering with the seller every week when you call them. If the real takeaway from point number 15 is if you do not over communicate with them in a market like this, I promise you they will resent you. They will actually work against you.
They may fire you.
And they will fire you. And then you're going to see somebody else gets the listing, maybe the same price that you had it listed at, and they sell it in the first week.
That's right.
You got to work on over communicating in this market with the seller. They must hear from you, again, at least once a week. And then if you have the other widgets that are working for you, the feedback widget, we also will suggest you send them reports. And luckily for all of you guys, this is all automated and very simple. How many views did they get on Realtor.com, for example? How many how many people looked at this ad or that ad? All this stuff is very simple. It's all out there. Matter of fact, many of you don't even realize that a lot of the things that are like KV Core through EXP and your MLS even, it keeps track of how many times was the house looked at by agents on the MLS, right? All this type of stuff. That's the information that you're going to have to start gathering for the seller, because here's the big question that you're going to be in fear of ever hearing. It's a version of, what have you done for me lately? But here's the real death blow that most listing agents are fearful of hearing. Once you have the listing, once you put all this work and sometimes money into getting it sold, the agent or the seller is going to ask you, hey, Bob, why haven't you been showing the property? That is a really, really scary question, and I'll give you the answer to that question in a second. But Bob, why haven't you been showing the property? And you're going to say, well, I've got all these ads going on. We've got all this, the Goodyear blimp. We are having all this, You are going to try to placate the seller, and that will work for a relatively short period of time, a week or 2 or 3. And then the seller is going to go, I hired you to sell this house. You haven't been showing this house. You are not bringing your buyers through. I hired you because I thought you actually knew what the hell you were doing and you'd have buyers. You're going to need to know how to handle that situation. If you actually have that conversation with that seller, it's because you've been ineffectively communicating up to
what you are doing for them.
Correct. And you didn't essentially set the whole relationship in a path towards success when you took the listing, thus the guide and learning how to say other things to them. You have to set realistic expectations, because if they're thinking like the house that they sold 3 years ago, it's going to sell in 3 seconds with 30 offers, and you now are into month 2, you're going to be fired because they feel like you lied to them. So the script for that, by the way, is, Mr. Seller, listen, I appreciate you asking, and that is a great question. And the fact is I might not always be the agent that's showing the house, but I am the reason that it's getting shown. And let me explain why. Most agents are basically just passive. They're going to stick it in the MLS. It's called the 5 Ps. They're going to put it in the MLS. they're going to, I don't remember all of them.
Pray to the real estate gods.
No, I think that was number 5.
Possibly try an open house.
That's right. And that was one of them. Put a sign in the yard.
Yeah.
And there was maybe another one. We have to find those. I forgot what the 5 Ps were. But yeah, so that's
basically they're passive.
Right. They're passive. That's really the essence of the 5 Ps. They're passive. They're not doing anything. Whereas what I'm doing, Mr. Seller, is I'm being proactive to get the property sold. That's the reason that in, say, for example, Realtor.com, you had, 47 people view all the pictures last week. That's the reason that you had, 6 showings in the past week. So I might not always be the agent that's showing the property, Mr. Seller, but I am the reason it's getting shown. Hopefully that, and then generally speaking, that's going to make the seller happy. But if you get that question, it's because you've not been over communicating up to that point, and they're setting the stage. They're essentially making it so that it's going to be easier for them to fire you. And when they do, they're going to say this: Bob never communicated with me. That's what they're going to say.
That's exactly right. And a lot of the work that we do in Premier Coaching is setting you guys up to have the scripts and the skills and the habits to avoid those types of uncomfortable conversations, especially when you're not used to having any of those, when it's never even crossed your mind because your listings were selling in 22 seconds. You have to be prepared for those conversations. So I'll tell you, our coaching clients have these specific things set up. They have multiple listings at the same time. They are talking to their sellers the same time, the same afternoon, every single week, using the 12-week seller communication plan until it sells. If they're not selling it right away because, they follow our pricing strategies and get it right in the first place, and they do things like this 15-piece checklist to make sure that you launch it correctly in the first place. Every one of our coaching clients has a specific plan for each listing because they're talking to them. I know because I talk to the coaches, because I talk to the coaching clients, that they'll say, I listed this on this date. If we make it to the 3rd weekend and we don't have somebody that we're dancing with offers, if not more than one, then we're going to adjust the price to more accurately represent the expectations of the market, of the buyers in the market, if they haven't already got a feedback plan and everything else.
The point is, there's certain things that you never say, and we teach you in Premier Coaching. Julie just gave you an example. So Mr. Seller, this is when you take the listing, right? And again, this is one of the many things you say to a seller so you don't set yourself up for failure and disappointment, so you set yourself up for success. Mr. Seller, if we don't have a verified written offer on your property in 2 weeks or 10 showings, and you have to adjust that accordingly. If you're selling more expensive stuff and the market's extra slow, you're going to have to know your market statistics. So you might want to say, 5 showings or 30 days or 3 showings. You guys get it. But, you figure that out. So if we don't have a written verified offer within 10 days or 10 showings or 2 weeks and 5 showings, whatever, that we agree that we will reposition the house in the market to correctly reflect the buyer's or the market's expectations. That's what you say when you take the listing. Now, what you're doing then is you're saying, so please, Mr. Seller, mark on your calendar, 14 days into the future. On the 15th day, I'm going to call you, and then we're going to review the house's position on the market. So again, we are in alignment with the buyer's expectations. So mark that down. What you've done is you told the seller ahead of time that there is a imminent price change conversation.
Setting expectations.
Right, exactly. And when you do that, you notice you had them write it down. They're going to expect that into the future. They're going to, and here's the thing, it's kind of amazing. It's kind of the call before the call, which is another script we teach you in Premier Coaching. But the essence of it is they're going to go through the emotional, like if you just call them out of the blue and say it's time for a price change, you use all bad words and, not swear words, but price change is a bad word in the mind of a seller, right? Mm-hmm. So if you call them out of the blue and say, I want to get a price change, they're going to say hell to the no in most cases.
Especially if that's the only thing they're hearing from you.
And guess what? You're probably going to set yourself up to be fired. Oh, someone's trying to FaceTime us. That's weird. Who the heck is that? Oh, that's Zoe's friend.
Just let it be. She'll handle it.
Okay, so Zoe knows how to get her own. Yeah. We are getting a FaceTime from a 9-year-old in Puerto Rico.
She must have just gotten home. Yes.
She did.
That's hilarious.
It is hilarious. All right, so the point of it is that if you don't set expectations, if you're telling the seller that in 2 weeks or 10 showings, we're going to have a price adjustment, a conversation, again, use our scripts, don't say price adjustment, right? Repositioning the market, how on the market to correctly reflect the market's expectation. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen is in those 2 weeks, all the emotions that would have of disappointment, of anger, of remorse, of resentment, all the normal emotions that a seller has to go through to let go of the idea that they're going to get some elevated price. They've sort of exercised those like you do in, like a Catholic priest is exercising a demon.
But they're not doing that on the phone with you when
right.
you call. They've already kind of worked it out in their head.
Exactly.
You know what always amazed me about this? 2 things. One is, this assumes that you don't price it right in the first place and sell it right away, because even in a shifting market, even a buyer's market, when it's priced right and it's staged properly and you prepare it like we did over these 15 points, a lot of that stuff will sell right away when you do it right up front.
Oh, yeah.
That still does happen. So I don't want to set their expectations that nothing's going to sell right away and you have to have this call every time. But the interesting thing when you set that seller up for 2 weeks or 10 showings or 30 days or 5 showings or whatever, is that sometimes they'll actually call you.
That's exactly what happens.
I was so shocked that, when we were first learning this, and they'd be like, well, we're on our 10th showing. I guess it's time to, take the price down. And the second part to that, which I think I originally learned from Rory, was to ask them what price they have in mind.
Actually, the script was, I remember this too.
Yeah.
So yes, which, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. We're having all these price reduction conversations with all of you guys again. It's been almost 20 years, but here we go. It's at what price does your heart stop?
Yeah,
that was one
that's
of the
probably
scripts.
jumping to extremes.
Yeah, but we teach you all this stuff. Yeah, there are actually scripts that we're not having to teach you guys yet because the market's not truly like it was. And,
we don't need to freak you out.
We've been doing this for so long. We've actually coached and trained and even sold real estate in a market for 10 years where there really was never a seller's market, where the average days in the market was 6 months.
The buyers had all the power then.
The buyers had all the power. Interest rates, by the way, were 6%, 7%, 8%. That was normal. Every mortgage was a 7-1 arm. 723 exactly. So that was all normal stuff. That's the reason we're comfortable and confident you guys will kick ass in this marketplace.
Yes, but
because we have coached millions of agents to do it. Yeah. Millions is an exaggeration, but I think hundreds of thousands would be a better way of stating it. Mm-hmm. And we know in this marketplace, it is actually easier to get traction because of the fact that so few agents have the skill set.
And because the sellers need you that much more.
That's right.
You've got to sell, not just have to sell. Maybe if I get my price, I'll sell. A lot of that is dried up. And so the good news about that is the sellers that remain are pretty dead serious about getting the job done. And that means you've got to be real serious about your skills. The types of things that we're talking about here, this is just the tip of the iceberg compared to what you get in coaching. Why would you go through a shifting market by yourself trying to figure out what in the world's going on and how you're supposed to talk about it?
Well, again, and that expired listings are the perfect listings to be pursuing right now because the seller wants to hire an agent. They've done it before. Mm-hmm. They're willing to pay a commission. So there's all the normal things that you guys worry about that are already resolved. But the best one is, what the price isn't. And I think even better than that, the sellers, I think, I would say overinflated sense of value
has dried up.
And maybe they're being really particular about allowing showings, or maybe they're resistant to actually listen to feedback, assuming they even got any from their previous listing agent. All of those things have just gone by poof in the wind, and now they're actually ready and amicable to listen to anything that's going to get the property sold. And in many cases, they've been burning their candle financially at both ends. They've got another house. They've got a reload.
Those are the best ones.
And they're going to be very motivated and they're going to listen to you. But here's the funny part. And this will shock you how frequently this happens. Anybody who's been in the business for more than 5 seconds has probably had this experience. You're going to go out and list an expired. You're going to price it at the exact same price. You're not even going to have time to put in pictures. You're going to write a description, but it's just basically a first draft. No measurements, no nothing money, and the house is going to sell with multiple offers. Even though it had just been on the market previously for 6 months with at the same price. Now, why does that happen? Because there's a whole bunch of little matriculations that happen inside the MLS. Agents and buyers even will decide, well, if the house hasn't sold within the first 30 days, again, this is how the market has to adjust to this new market. Mm-hmm. The perception is if it doesn't sell really, not even within 30 days, but within 1 week, that something must be wrong with it. And then new listings come up, and what happens is the days in the market starts to extend. Buyers agents and even buyers stop looking at it, stop setting up showings.
It's like driving past a billboard. The first couple times you see it, you notice, oh, that's interesting, and then you just keep on driving past because you've already registered it in your brain. And you're like, all right, well, maybe I'll notice again when it changes. It's human nature, right? So it is true. If you actually look and you compare days on the market to a newly listed expired versus how many days on the market it languished, usually expireds, sometimes with some tweaks, will sell right away or real close to right away. And I think one of the reasons is that sellers, we would say, are more coachable. Now, Are there some expireds that are losing their will to sell? Yes. But the best ones, they'll say, tell me what to do to get it sold. They're much more coachable, and that's why it sells faster.
The only way you're going to have these experiences of what Julie and I are sharing with you is if you do the real work of real estate, which means you're going to have the skills necessary to earn the right to be that seller's new listing agent. And that's what we teach you in Premier Coaching, amongst many, 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 many other things. So text the word Premier to 47372, text the word Premier to 47372, or simply go to members.timandjulieharris.com. Remember, when texting, message and data rates may apply. So Julie Harris, what is the topic for tomorrow? Have you decided yet?
Tomorrow is what we were working on about helping them to talk to buyers about why it is still a good time to buy. There's a shocking thought, right? It is still a good time to buy. Who's saying that? And I've had a lot of reports from coaching clients that have run into other agents that are, for some reason, wandering around the wilds of real estate saying, oh, I guess it's not a great time to buy anymore. It's not time to sell anymore. How is your business going to do if that's your philosophy?
This is going to be a killer podcast. You and I have been working on this on our morning walks for
I think it's
going
to be a multi-part at this point.
Yeah, it's fine. And so as promised, what we're going to do is we're going to present this to you guys in the podcast over the next 2 to 3 days, and then we're going to make it to 1 or 2 videos. The videos that we're going to make, the lovely Julie Harris will be doing, and make sure, if you guys haven't checked out our YouTube channel, we're really piling on a ton of new content that's YouTube exclusive. But then what we're going to do is we're going to make a video or videos presenting that content to your prospective buyers. And the idea is that then you can take those videos and then you can download them and or just share the link with your prospective buyers, so you can then essentially feel more comfortable working with them, and they can feel more comfortable buying a house. Because a lot of times what happens, and Julie just expressed it, is the buyer's agents are the ones that are querying the sale because they don't really know what's going on in the market. They don't, like, I got a message today, someone was asking me, like, how do I sign up to get the REOs? To which I said, well, what REOs? Go to your MLS and find out, tell me how many notice of defaults there are. I already knew what the percent of distressed property was in the country, but I wanted her to go and do homework herself. Guess what? There were no notice of defaults in her MLS. Done. None. Zero. Like zilch. And obviously, notice of defaults are the precursor to REOs. Why am I sharing this with you guys? Focus on the opportunity that's in front of you. And the market is, and again, this is a conversation for you to have with your buyers. If you think that there's going to be a lot of distressed real estate that's coming up, chances are, because most of you guys are honest, ethical, moral people, you're not going to feel comfortable telling someone to buy a house if you think there's a high probability the house will be worth substantially less in the future. And you're talking yourself out of working with buyers. You're talking yourself out of selling real estate. Well, here's the actual facts. What we're going to show you over the next few days on the podcast. Now is probably the best time to buy a house in maybe the next 10 years, even with the interest rates, right? Because of inflation. And this is going to be something that if you don't sell them the house, if you don't show them the house, if you're not encouraging in them and motivating them to move forward and buying the house, and then a year from now, their rent's gone up by 25%, and the house they would have otherwise bought's gone up by at least 10 or 15%, how are you going to feel then? And that's what you're setting yourself up for. So make sure you guys listen to the pods over the next few days. In the meantime, thank you for continuing to make this the #1 listened to daily podcast for real estate professionals in at least the United States. Please do comment, like, subscribe. If you're over on YouTube, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. That channel's getting a lot of momentum. We certainly appreciate it. If there's ever anything we can do for you guys, you can actually text me directly at 512-758-0206. Do not call, text. If you call, I will not answer. By the way, if you're ready to join eXp Realty, you can also text me directly at 512-758-0206, and we can have that conversation as well. Or you can always message us on Instagram, or even message us in YouTube. You guys have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.